Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be looking at something that I think is very relevant to almost everyone listening, and that's strategic management. And, how do companies win in the long run? And we've got a whole stack of academic papers here about how companies can build and sustain a competitive advantage.
Oh, yeah.
And, just going through the notes beforehand, some of the stuff we're going to talk about is pretty counterintuitive. Like sometimes your biggest strengths can actually hold you back. So
That's true.
yeah, interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Like the classic saying is, what got you here won't get you there, right?
Right.
But before we jump into all that good stuff, maybe it's worth going back to the beginning and just thinking about how did this whole field of strategic management even come about?
Yeah, that's a great point. Looking at our notes, it seems like the real beginning was after World War II.
Yeah.
With all the economic and technological change, businesses really needed a new way to think about strategy. It wasn't just about producing goods anymore, right? It was about outsmarting the competition.
Exactly. And that's where things start to get really interesting, because one of the things that our notes mentioned was this thing called the Harvard Business School case method.
Okay.
And the idea was, instead of just learning dry theory, they would throw you into these real-life scenarios, kind of mini business simulations, and you'd have to make these tough decisions.
Oh, wow. So it's like less textbook, more trial by fire.
Exactly. Yeah, you're forced to think strategically. You can't just memorize facts.
Right.
It was about really developing that practical understanding of how to analyze situations, how to identify opportunities and make smart choices in a complex and unpredictable world. And then moving on a little bit later in the 60s, we have the Boston Consulting Group coming onto the scene, with their famous growth share matrix.
Oh, yeah, the growth share matrix. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
Isn't that the one where they categorize businesses as stars or dogs or something like that?
Well, not exactly. I mean, it's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
But the basic idea was to help companies analyze their portfolio of businesses and figure out where to invest their resources.
Okay.
It provided this really simple visual way to assess a business unit's market share and its growth potential and, how attractive it was as an investment.
So it's like a tool for prioritizing where to put your energy and money.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. But, going through these notes, I'm noticing there wasn't just one right way to think about strategy. There are these different schools of thought emerging. Our notes mention traditional strategy versus something called the Austrian School.
Yeah.
What was the difference there?
Yeah, you're picking up on a key point here.
Yeah.
So traditional strategy frameworks like Porter's Five Forces, it's all about analyzing the external environment.
Okay.
Things like industry structure, competitors, suppliers.
Right.
Really all about finding the right position in the market to gain an advantage.
Okay. So size up your rivals, figure out where you fit in.
Yeah, exactly.
But the Austrian School, they had a different take.
Yeah, they did. Thinkers like Jacobson, who wrote this really pivotal paper in 1991, argued that markets are incredibly dynamic and unpredictable. He said that focusing too much on those static analyses could actually make you miss opportunities.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So the Austrian school emphasized things like entrepreneurship innovation.
Okay.
And being able to adapt quickly to ever-changing circumstances.
So less about finding that fixed position, more about riding the wave.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like surfing. You can't just stand still on a surfboard. You need to be constantly adjusting to the changing conditions.
Right.
And actually, that leads us nicely to the next big idea in our notes.
Okay.
The concept of life cycles.
Life cycles? Okay, like for products.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I get that things are born, they grow, they mature.
Right.
And eventually they, fade away. But our notes are suggesting that it's not just products that go through this cycle.
That's right. I mean, I think about industries, even entire companies go through these phases too. They're born, they experience this rapid growth, and they mature, and eventually they either adapt or they...
Yeah, they go the way of the dodo.
Right, exactly.
So it's like knowing winter is coming, you don't just wait to freeze. You got to stock up on firewood.
Yeah.
But how do companies actually do that? How do they prepare for those changes?
Well, one really interesting concept our notes highlight is this thing called ambidextrous organizations.
Okay.
And these are companies that manage to do two seemingly contradictory things at the same time. They explore and they exploit.
Okay.
So they're really good at squeezing every last drop of profit out of their current business. That's the exploitation part.
Okay.
But at the same time, they're constantly exploring new ideas, innovating, preparing for the future.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It is. It's a real balancing act.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway here is that this balancing act is crucial for long-term success. Because if you get too focused on exploiting your existing business, you might miss the next big wave,
Yeah.
But if you're constantly chasing new ideas without a solid operational foundation, that could be just as dangerous.
Yeah, you'll be spread too thin.
Exactly. You need to find that sweet spot.
That makes sense, but it sounds like a real challenge. Okay, so you need to be lean and mean today, but also planting those seeds for tomorrow.
That's it.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay, so then our notes take kind of a turn inward here.
Okay.
We move from analyzing the external environment to looking at the internal resources that give a company an edge.
Right.
And this is where the resource-based view comes in, right?
Oh, RBV.
Yeah, the RBV. And this is a powerful shift in perspective.
Okay.
Because while traditional strategy often starts with the outside world, analyzing the market competitors, etc., RBV says, hey, let's look at what makes you unique. It argues that true competitive advantage comes from the unique internal resources that a company possesses.
So instead of just trying to find the right spot on the chessboard, you're saying it's more about developing these unique pieces that give you an advantage no matter where you are. That's a great analogy. And our notes point to some really influential papers that lay the foundation for this way of thinking. Werner Felt, back in 1984, really introduced this framework. He challenged the traditional focus on external factors and argued that a company's internal resources are the key drivers of competitive advantage.
So not just being in the right place at the right time, but having something special that nobody else has.
Exactly. And then in 1989, Dierickx and Kuhl took this idea even further.
Okay.
And they explored how these resources are accumulated over time, something we'll definitely get into later.
Okay, so we've got Werner Felt setting the stage, Dierickx and Kuhl adding another layer.
Yeah.
Were there any other key players in this whole RBV movement?
Absolutely. We can't talk about RBV without mentioning Barney.
Okay.
And his famous VR framework.
Okay.
Which he introduced in this groundbreaking 1991 paper.
Okay.
And it's this way to assess whether a company's resources can lead to a sustainable competitive advantage.
Okay, sustainable meaning it's not just a fleeting advantage, it's something you can maintain over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But before we jump into VRN, we need to be clear on what kinds of resources we're even talking about here.
Okay, yeah. Our notes mention tangible and intangible resources.
Yeah.
I get tangible, things you can touch like physical assets and cash, but intangible.
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Intangible resources are the things you can't easily see or touch.
Okay.
But they can be incredibly valuable. So think about things like knowledge brand, reputation, a strong company culture, that secret sauce that makes a company tick.
Right.
These are often the resources that are truly unique and difficult to copy.
Yeah. The stuff you can't just buy off the shelf.
Exactly.
Okay, but here's a question that pops into my mind. Is it enough to just have these great resources? Like if I have a garage full of rare vintage guitars, does that make me a rock star?
That's a great question. And it highlights this crucial distinction between resource possession versus resource utilization.
Okay.
Having a garage full of guitars is great.
Sure.
But if you don't know how to play them, they're not doing you much good.
Right. It's the same with companies. Simply owning valuable resources is only part of the equation. You need the capabilities to actually leverage them effectively.
So it's not just about what you have, but how you use it?
Exactly.
Okay. So like having the best ingredients in the world doesn't guarantee a good meal you need to know how to cook.
Precisely. And that aligns with this broader theme in the strategic management literature is the importance of developing those organizational capabilities to leverage your unique resources effectively.
Okay.
You could have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have the right people and processes in place, you're not going to be able to capitalize on it.
Right.
It's all about finding that synergy between resources and capabilities.
Okay. I'm starting to see why this stuff is so important.
Yeah.
It's not just theory. It's about understanding what makes a business truly successful and how to stay ahead of the competition.
Right.
Speaking of competition, our notes also mention that RBV sees resources as factors of production.
Yes.
Now, isn't that an economics term? It is. In classic economic theory, the factors of production are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship.
Right.
But RBV extends that idea by saying that it's the firm-specific non-generic resources that really drive competitive advantage.
Okay.
It's not just about having labor. It's about having a team with unique skills and experience that nobody else can replicate.
So you're saying it's those unique, hard-to-copy resources that really give a company an edge.
Exactly. In practice, these strategic resources might include proprietary technology or a powerful brand that's been built over decades, a highly skilled workforce, or superior operational processes that have been honed over time.
Right.
These are the things that set a company apart and make it really difficult for competitors to catch up.
Makes sense. Okay, now before we move on, can we circle back to that concept of asset stock accumulation that Derricks and Kuhl were talking about?
Yeah.
What's that all about?
Think of it like building a stockpile.
Okay.
But instead of amassing physical goods, you're accumulating valuable resources over time. And it's an ongoing process. It's not a one-time event.
Right.
It's about making strategic investments, developing your capabilities, and building that competitive edge brick by brick.
So sustainable advantage isn't something you just stumble upon. It's something you actively build.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. It's not as simple as just throwing money at the problem.
Okay.
There are all sorts of factors that can influence how quickly and effectively you can build up this asset stock.
Okay. Let's unpack those factors and see what makes this whole process so tricky.
Sounds good.
All right. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay, so building this asset stock, this stockpile of competitive advantage, it's an ongoing process.
It is.
But our notes say it's not as simple as just working hard or investing a lot of money. There are these things called, time compression diseconomies. That sounds complicated.
It's actually a pretty simple idea once you break it down. It basically means that you can't rush the process. Trying to build up your resources too quickly can actually backfire. It's like trying to bake a cake in 5 minutes. You just can't force it.
So slow and steady wins the race. Like building a house, you need to lay a solid foundation before you start putting up the walls.
Exactly. But then there's this other concept that's kind of the opposite, asset mass efficiencies.
Okay.
And this means that early advantages can actually snowball. The more you accumulate a particular resource, the easier it becomes to accumulate even more.
So it's like the rich get richer. The more you have, the easier it is to get even more.
Right. Think about a company like Amazon. They got an early lead in e-commerce, and that allowed them to build up this massive infrastructure, a huge customer base, and a ton of data.
Right.
Which has only made them even more dominant over time.
Yeah.
It's a classic example of asset mass efficiencies at work.
Makes you wonder if some companies just get lucky or if there's always some underlying factor that gives them that initial edge.
Yeah.
But it's not always smooth sailing, right? Our notes also mention interconnectedness. What's that all about?
Interconnectedness refers to the idea that resources often work together, like pieces of a puzzle. You might have one amazing resource.
Yeah.
But it's useless without the others. It's like having a great engine for a car, but no wheels. You're not going anywhere.
So it's not just about having star players, it's about having a team that works well together.
That's a great way to put it. And of course, there's asset erosion. Sadly, those precious resources, they don't last forever.
Yeah.
They decay over time if you don't maintain them.
Right.
Think about a company that's built its reputation on exceptional customer service, but then they start cutting corners and neglecting their customers.
Yeah.
Well, that reputation, that valuable resource, is going to erode over time if they don't actively work to preserve it.
It's like a vintage guitar that needs constant care and attention if you want to keep it sounding beautiful. Okay, so we've got time compression diseconomies, asset mass efficiencies, interconnectedness, and asset erosion. Anything else we need to keep in mind?
One of the most fascinating factors, and one that I think is often overlooked, is causal ambiguity. Remember, we talked about that earlier. It's the idea that it can be really hard to pinpoint exactly what makes a company successful. Sometimes even the companies themselves don't know.
But isn't that kind of a problem? If you don't know why you're successful, how can you keep doing it? How can you prevent competitors from copying you?
That's the paradox. It can be a source of both strength and weakness. On the one hand, causal ambiguity can make it really hard for competitors to replicate your success because they can't quite figure out what's driving it.
Okay.
It's like trying to recreate a magic trick without knowing the secret.
Right.
But on the other hand, if you don't fully understand what's making you successful, it can be hard to maintain that success over time,
So it's like riding a wave, but not quite knowing what's propelling you forward. You could be on top of the world 1 minute and then wiped out the next.
Exactly. And this brings us to this really crucial concept, core competencies versus core rigidities.
Okay, now those sound like opposites. Help me out here.
Okay, so think of core competencies as those things you do exceptionally well, the unique capabilities that give you a competitive edge.
Okay.
It's what you're known for, what sets you apart from the crowd. But here's the twist. Sometimes those same strengths can turn into weaknesses.
Wait, how does that happen? Why would something that made you successful suddenly become a liability?
Or imagine a company that's been incredibly successful, doing things a certain way for years, maybe decades.
Okay.
They've built up this incredible expertise in a particular area, a core competency that's the envy of their competitors.
Right.
But what happens when the market shifts, customer preferences change, or some disruptive new technology emerges?
Oh, I see where this is going.
Suddenly, those once valuable competencies can become entrenched, inflexible.
Right.
They turn into core rigidities that actually prevent the company from adapting.
Yeah.
They're so good at doing things the old way that they can't seem to embrace the new.
So it's like trying to use a typewriter to send an email, the wrong tool for the job, even if you're a master typist.
Perfect analogy. And this often happens because of something called organizational inertia.
Okay.
People get comfortable doing things a certain way. They resist change even when it's necessary.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change, but it seems like humans and the organizations we create are hardwired to resist it.
It's definitely a challenge. But before we get too deep into the psychology of organizational change, let's circle back to Barney and his VREN framework.
Okay.
Remember, that's the tool we can use to assess whether a company's resources can truly lead to a sustainable competitive advantage.
Right. VREN: valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-substitutable.
That's it.
Okay, we touched on those briefly before, but let's break them down one by one.
That's good. Let's start with valuable. This one's pretty straightforward. A resource is valuable if it actually helps you create value for your customers and improve your overall performance.
Okay.
If it's not contributing to your success, why are you even bothering with it?
Makes sense. It's like having a fancy espresso machine in your office, but nobody drinks coffee, a total waste of resources.
Exactly. Next up is rare, as the name suggests. A rare resource is something that's not widely available to your competitors if everyone has it. It's not going to give you a unique advantage.
So it's like having a website in 2023, not exactly a competitive edge anymore?
Not really. But this is where it gets interesting. Inimitable.
Okay.
This is all about how difficult it is for others to copy what you've got.
And our notes mention some pretty fascinating reasons why some resources are just too tricky to imitate: path dependency, causal ambiguity, and social complexity.
Right.
Let's unpack those, shall we?
Let's do it. So, path dependency means that your advantage is the result of a unique series of events or decisions that can't easily be replicated. It's like those winding roads in old European cities. They weren't planned that way. They just evolved organically over centuries.
So it's not just about what you have, but how you got there. It's your unique story, your journey, that makes you inimitable.
Precisely. And then there's causal ambiguity, which we've already touched on. It's when it's hard to even figure out why something is working. There's this mysterious element to it, like a secret family recipe that nobody can quite crack.
I love that analogy. It's like those legendary barbecue joints that have been using the same secret sauce for generations. Nobody knows exactly what's in it, but it just works.
Exactly. And finally, there's social complexity. And this refers to advantages that stem from complex social relationships, networks, and organizational culture. Think about companies like Google or Pixar. Their success isn't just about their technology or talent. It's about that unique culture they've created, that collaborative, innovative spirit.
Right.
That's incredibly hard to replicate.
It's like trying to bottle the magic of a great team. You can't just copy the ingredients you need to capture the essence of how those ingredients work together.
Okay.
So we've got valuable, rare, and inimitable. What's the final piece of the VREN puzzle?
The final piece is non-substitutable. This means there are no easy substitutes for your resource.
Yeah.
Even if it's not perfectly imitable. Think about diamonds. They're rare and valuable, but there are other precious stones that could be substituted.
Right.
A truly non-substitutable resource is one-of-a-kind, irreplaceable.
Okay, so running through this VREN checklist gives you a sense of whether your advantage is built on solid ground, but it's not a one-time thing, right? You need to keep reassessing as things change.
Right.
As competitors catch up or as the market evolves.
Absolutely. The competitive landscape is never static.
Right.
And that brings us back to the idea of continuous adaptation and the challenges of staying ahead in a world where everything is in constant flux. Remember that concept of post-competition dynamics that we mentioned earlier?
Vaguely refresh my memory. What does that even mean?
Basically, it means that even after achieving a competitive advantage, the game's not over. It's this constant process of adaptation and evolution. You're on this treadmill, and you can't just stop running.
Okay, so you've climbed one mountain, but there's a whole range out there, and the terrain is constantly shifting. How do you even begin to navigate that?
That's where things get really interesting. And to be honest, there's no simple answer. There's no magic formula.
Okay.
But our notes offer some thought-provoking ideas that might help us find our way.
I'm all ears. Give me the highlights. What does it take to truly thrive in this dynamic, ever-changing world?
Well, one thing
that
really stands out in our notes is the importance of cultivating this mindset of continuous learning and improvement.
Yeah.
It's like, upgrading your operating system. If you're running on outdated software, you're going to be slow, clunky, and vulnerable to all sorts of threats.
So it's not enough to just learn something once and call it a day.
Right.
We need to be constantly updating our knowledge and skills.
Exactly. The world is changing faster than ever.
Right.
And the skills that are valuable today might be obsolete tomorrow. I mean, think about how much the job market has transformed in just the past decade. It's all about embracing lifelong learning, staying curious, and being willing to step outside your comfort zone.
So we need to be adaptable and embrace change, but we also need to know what to learn and how to learn it. Any tips on that front?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is the importance of experimentation.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to try new things, to tinker, to explore different approaches.
Yeah.
You'll inevitably make mistakes along the way, but that's part of the process. The key is to learn from those mistakes and keep iterating.
I guess it's like that Thomas Edison quote, "I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Easier said than done right. Not everyone's comfortable with failure.
True, but remember, failure isn't the opposite of success. It's a stepping stone towards success. The most successful companies and individuals are often the ones who've embraced failure as a learning opportunity.
That makes sense. It's about having that growth mindset, seeing setbacks not as defeats, but as valuable feedback. But isn't there also a danger in constantly chasing new ideas?
Yeah.
I mean, at some point, you need to buckle down and execute right.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to the concept of ambidexterity that we discussed earlier.
Right.
Remember, it's about finding that balance between exploration and exploitation.
Right.
You need to be efficient and effective in your current operations, but also carve out time and resources for those activities that spark your curiosity, help you grow, and keep you adaptable.
It's like walking a tightrope. You need to be steady and balanced, but also agile and responsive to those sudden gusts of wind. Okay, so continuous learning, experimentation, and ambidexterity. What else should we be thinking about as we navigate this complex landscape?
Well, one thing that keeps popping up in our notes is the importance of relationships and networks.
Okay.
In today's interconnected world, nobody succeeds in isolation.
Right.
You need to collaborate with others, share knowledge, and build trust.
So it's not just about competition, it's about cooperation too.
Exactly. And this can take many forms, partnerships, alliances, mentorship relationships, even just casual conversations with people in different fields or industries. The more diverse your network, the broader your perspective will become.
I guess it's like that old saying, 2 heads are better than 1. But finding and nurturing those relationships takes time and effort. Any tips on how to build a network that actually adds value?
Well, that could be a whole deep dive on its own.
Right.
But one key piece of advice that comes to mind is to focus on giving more than you take.
Okay.
Be genuinely interested in other people. Offer your help whenever you can, and don't be afraid to ask for advice or support when you need it.
It's about building those authentic connections, not just collecting business cards.
Exactly. And those connections can be incredibly valuable, not just for your career, but for your personal growth as well. They can expose you to new ideas, challenge your assumptions, and help you see the world from different perspectives.
So it's like having a team of advisors, cheerleaders, and thought partners all rolled into one.
I like that. And remember, building a strong network isn't about being fake or manipulative.
Right.
It's about being authentic, generous, and genuinely interested in connecting with others.
Okay, so we've got continuous learning, experimentation, ambidexterity, and the importance of building strong relationships. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up this deep dive?
Well, our notes don't offer any easy answers or magic formulas.
Right.
And frankly, I think that's a good thing. The world is too complex and dynamic to be reduced to a set of simple rules, but they do leave us with some provocative questions to ponder.
Okay.
Questions that can help us navigate this ever-changing landscape.
Let's hear them.
For example, how can you apply these concepts of resourcefulness, adaptability, and continuous evolution, not just to companies, but to your own personal and professional development? What are your unique strengths? What makes you you? Those are your personal resources.
Whoa, that's powerful. It's like taking that Viron framework and applying it to ourselves. Am I valuable? Am I rare? Am I difficult to imitate? And can I be easily replaced? Those are some tough questions to ask yourself.
They are, but they're the questions we need to be asking ourselves if we want to thrive in this complex, competitive world. And remember, it's not about becoming some kind of robotic, optimized machine.
Right.
It's about leveraging those unique qualities that make you human. You know, your creativity, your empathy, your ability to connect with others, your passion, your resilience. Those are the things that no algorithm or AI can replicate.
It's about being the best version of ourselves, not trying to be someone else.
Exactly. And just like companies need to be ambidextrous, balancing exploration and exploitation, we need to find that balance in our own lives.
Right.
You know,
Right.
we need to be reliable and efficient in our day-to-day routines, but also make time for those activities that spark our curiosity,
Yeah.
help us grow and keep us adaptable, the things that make us uniquely valuable, rare, and inimitable.
It's about having a solid foundation, but also being willing to step outside our comfort zones, to explore, to experiment, to evolve.
That's the key. And it's a lifelong journey. The world is constantly changing, and so are we.
Right.
The goal isn't to reach some static endpoint, but to develop the skills and mindset to continuously learn, adapt, and grow, to become the best possible version of ourselves, whatever that might look like.
That's a brilliant way to sum it all up. It's not about finding a permanent spot on the mountaintop. It's about becoming the kind of climber who can navigate any terrain.
Beautifully said. And remember, even the most experienced climbers rely on their gear, their training, and their team.
Right.
So build your network, find mentors, and surround yourself with people who challenge and inspire you to reach new heights.
Great advice. So to all our listeners out there, we'll leave you with this. What are your unique strengths? What are you doing to cultivate those strengths and stay ahead of the curve? And who are the people in your life who can help you on this journey? Keep those questions in mind, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.